Hey, Tapping Airlines Math Industry, and we are going to be asking a really big question. Why do teachers discourage the quadratic formula? What? So, when you were in algebra in high school, you probably took a look at this formula here. It's called the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So what's happening is if you had an equation that had a, b, and c be x, but a had a coefficient other than 1, like 2a squared plus bx plus c equals 0, that would be the form of it. But there is a little problem with the quadratic formula. One, you see this problem right here? We have a quadratic of 2x minus 8x. No, wait, 2x squared minus 8x minus 24 is going to equal 0. So that is our quadratic. To understand why the quadratic formula is discouraged, we are going to do two things. One, the quadratic formula, and two, we are going to do factoring. We should get the same answer on both methods. So let's do the quadratic formula. So doing the quadratic formula and inserting this quadratic into the equation, here is what's going to happen. We are going to have x is going to equal positive 8, because a negative times a negative is a positive. That is going to be our negative b. Now we have to add and subtract a giant square root of negative 8 squared. Then we have to subtract that by the product of 4 times a, which is 2, times negative 24. So we have to find the product of all of them. Then we have to divide that by 2, multiply that by 2. So here's what we're going to do. Solve it out. Negative 8 squared is going to be 64. And the product of this, 4 times 2 times negative 24, is going to be minus that by minus 192. We can add them because we have a minus and a minus. Then x squared, x is going to equal 8 plus minus the square root of 64 plus 192. Divide that by 4. There's a lot of steps in this. Now I can do 64 plus 192 is going to be 256. So x is going to equal 8 plus minus the square root of 256. Divide that by 4. Square root of 256 is going to represent 16. Therefore, we can simplify again that x equals 8 plus minus 16 divided by 4. So there are two solutions. 8 plus 16 is going to be 24 divided by 4. Our first x is going to equal 6. Or we are going to say 8 minus that by 16 divided by 2. 8 minus 16 is negative 8 divided by 4 is going to be negative 2. X is going to equal 6 or negative 2. So that is what we got for our answers using the quadratic formula. But hang on, how are we going to do that? By factoring right over here. When we factor, we should get x equals 6 or x equals negative 2. Let's see what happens. So when we divide everything by 2, because everything is factorable, greatest common factor of 2, we have x squared minus 4x minus that by 12 equals 0. So when we do two binomials that can go into this trinomial or this quadratic trinomial, we have x and x to multiply into x squared. X times x is x squared. But what number can multiply into here, negative 12, and also multiply into also add up to negative 4. Well, 2 and 6 can multiply up to 12, but not negative 12. Unless if I do this. If I'm going to say, if I say negative 6 and positive 2, negative 6 times positive 2 will get me negative 12. But negative 6 plus 2 is going to be negative 4. So here's what we have to do next. On a separate piece of paper, we have to say x plus 2 equals 0. And x minus 6 equals 0. We have to subtract by 2, add 6, add 6. The reason why is we pulled these two binomials and made them to 0. When we get to our final answers, two answers, for the top one, x is going to equal negative 2. And on the bottom one, x is going to equal positive 6. Or 6. So we got the same answer as the one from the quadratic formula. But the thing is, when we factored it out, it took a lot less steps and that took a lot less arithmetic. So there's a reason why that many teachers discourage the quadratic formula. 1, it requires a lot of steps. 2, there's a lot of fact checking. 3, there's a high probability of making a mistake leading your answer in jeopardy. And 4, it's only used for one kind of equation. Because sometimes when you go into some kind of algebra, we use the quadratic formula when we usually have a coefficient other than 1, and it has the quadratic as a square. But sometimes you'll have to factor things that are like x to the 4th power, or like x to the 5th, or extremely x to the 9th, which the quadratic formula cannot work on. When you factor, no matter what exponent is right after the x on your a value, it will still work. And also, factoring doesn't require a lot of steps. It requires a lot of thinking, but not requiring a lot of guessing and checking this and checking that. And there's a low probability of making a mistake. So there is the reason why do teachers discourage the quadratic formula? Thank you for watching Top Penalized Math Industry. Like and subscribe.